She is the Democratic nominee for Congress in New York's 14th Congressional District. She strikes fear in the hearts of Joe Lieberman and James Comey. Welcome, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. So you've had this rise. You've been traveling the country campaigning. Candidates want you there. You've inspired people. One sign for me is a bunch of people from our team at Crooked wanted to meet you. And you should just know that they're not banging down the door when Dick Durbin comes to town. What do you make of that? What do you think is driving that interest?
I think that for so long, I think just lots of everyday people across the country have been frustrated with our politics. And I think there were certain aspects about my win, even if you take the politics off the table, the fact that we were a grassroots campaign, that I didn't take any lobbyist money, that I had defeated not just a 10-term incumbent, but was outspent 10-1, and we still won. I think it was kind of this, okay, things are maybe still possible in America, that I think, really resonated with a lot of folks across the political spectrum.
So you've said our swing voter is not red to blue. Our swing voter is the non-voter to the voter, which is something that echoes what we've been talking about a lot. Mm-hmm. What do you think are the issues that are going to get non-voters to become voters? And what have you learned being on the trail? You've been in Kansas. You've been all over the place.
Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of this opposite of what I think a lot of folks in the political establishment think, that they think that this running to the center, moderating our policies, being as close to a saltine cracker as possible is what is going to make us win elections. And I don't think that that's the case. I think what animates non-voters is feeling like someone is really fighting for them. And I think there are a lot of folks that have felt as though the Democratic Party hasn't been fighting hard enough for them in terms of being really clear about articulating our priorities, drawing a line in the sand, not just saying we care about education, healthcare, and housing, but we believe in single-payer healthcare. Just having a plan, an idea, instead of just reform. And so I think that in order to turn out non-voters, we need to be really explicit in how we are fighting for them. In New York 14, our district is half in the Bronx, half in Queens. Voter turnout is 3% in the primaries. And we expanded the electorate 68% over the last off-year midterm primary in order for us to win. And the under 40 electorate actually matched the over 60 electorate in our race, which is
amazing.
Unheard of. Yeah. But it's because we talked about student loans. We talked about climate change. We talked about the things that our generation is going to have to deal with.
Yeah, so you face this blowback. I want to get to the conservative blowback, but there's even been some moderates or just, Democratic mainstream politicians who have said, hold on a second, she won in the Bronx, but she doesn't know what works in the Midwest, or she doesn't know what works in Kansas. Now, I know you've pushed back on that, but I guess there are more non-voters that we can get to become voters than there are Republicans that we can make Democrats, or independents that we can get to turn out for Democrats. But do you think that do you at least recognize that there's a trade-off there, or do you reject the trade-off too? So I guess I would argue that, maybe there are some independents that might be turned off by moving to the left, but it's worth it because we can get the non-voters to turn out. Yeah, no,
I'm not here to say that my platform is going to win everybody across all electorates. But I agree with you. I think that there's much more to be gained by targeting non-voters than by targeting Republicans. And even then, I was having this conversation last night. When I think about a swing voter, all the swing voters that I know in my life, all the swing voters that I've also met in my life, they never make their decision based on who is the most moderate one. They don't. The people who go, for example, your Obama to Trump voter, they didn't vote for Obama because he was the most Republican of them all. And he didn't.
Right.
And they didn't vote for Trump because he was the most Democratic of them all. I think that swing voters make their decisions on factors that are actually independent of political ideology. And we're so we are so boiled down and myopic about left-right political understanding that I think that we just like don't even understand what a swing voter is. I think they vote based on certain character-based things. I think they vote based on authenticity. I think they vote based on how much they think they can trust one candidate over another. I think they vote on certain even like emotional or character-based factors more in some cases than certain political ideologies.
So then does being for what does being for Medicare for all then represent to those voters? Is it about being anti-establishment? Is it about advocating for what you believe in? Because if you take that position that these are people that are turning out for reasons other than ideology, what role does the ideology play?
Well, the ideology, I think, plays a really big role because I think what people are really thirsty for as well is that I think they actually are looking for a working class champion. And as much as Trump was lying through his teeth the entire campaign trail, if you took the painful time to pay attention to his rallies, he was speaking very directly to working class people, especially in the Midwest. He was talking about trade. When you heard him talk about healthcare, he was saying, we're going to make your copays cheaper. We're going to lower your deductibles. He was describing the outcomes of Medicare for all. He was the most liberal of the entire Republican field on healthcare. So I think that people are really just looking for someone that's willing to kind of stick their neck out in order to advance the issues of working class Americans. And I think that is in conjunction with this idea of trust and authenticity, and whether it's deserved or not, I think there's a real hunger for it.
One thing, you're from New York. You're younger than me, which is annoying. But the I think there's a lot of people around our age who grew up with Trump as a figure in New York.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, for me, when I hear Trump speak, I recognize a certain kind of New York working class voice. Do you have that feeling when you hear him?
Totally. I know that guy.
Yeah.
I know that guy. I know him really, really well. I may not have met him, but I feel like in this very bizarre way that I understand Donald Trump's soul. I have bartended for Donald Trump. I have, I've had guys catcall me who are Donald Trump in New York City. My father was an architect. He's dealt with guys in business, like these shady real estate developers.
Yeah.
I know that guy. And I also understand his personality. It's like a very New York old school archetype kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's amazing how he has that. He has that specific. His skill is that he doesn't sound like the kind of rich New Yorker he is and has always wanted to be. He does sound more like a Queens guy or a Bronx guy. You hear it.
Mm-hmm. He totally does. That's the one thing that I don't understand too.
Yeah.
That's the one thing that is kind of a trip to me. I'm like, how does this multi-generational silver spoon guy sound like this? Not just sound like this, but he is it in a weird way.
Yeah.
But I think it also probably maybe has to do with the industry that his family came from.
Yeah.
Because these New York construction real estate developer guys, they have that personality too. So I think it has to do with the industry that his family comes from, that he's able to channel that, because it's very much a thing.
Yeah.
It's a thing. He's not an aberration, which is why I feel like I have the approach to him that I have, because I know how to deal with guys like that. And the way that you deal with them is not giving them more attention.
Yeah. I think that, we've tried giving him more attention, and so far it hasn't worked.
Yeah.
So I asked on Twitter what people wanted us to talk with you about, and there were two main categories. There was somehow it got into the conservative bloodstream.
Oh, it always is.
You seem to have that effect on people.
I think they have a search query up, like a Google alert.
So, there was a lot of bad faith. What happens after you seize the means of production and turn us into Venezuela? But there is a mentality around spending inside of that I did want to talk about. We don't talk about what defense costs. We're about to hit $1 trillion in debt because of the corporate tax cuts. Yet when we talk about pre-K, healthcare, college,
Exactly.
suddenly it's unrealistic because of the cost. And it's not just bad faith Republicans that make that argument. You hear it from Democrats as well. What's your response to that?
Well, I think it's that same exact thing. It's that they say, how are you going to pay for it? As though they haven't used these same ways to pay for unlimited wars, to pay for trillion-dollar tax cuts and tax cut extensions. They use these mechanisms to pay for these things all the time. They only want to know, it just seems like their pockets are only empty when we're talking about education and investing in human capital in the United States, education, healthcare, housing, and investing in the middle class. All of a sudden, there's nothing left. All of a sudden, the wealthiest nation in the world we're just totally scarce. And we have complete scarcity when it comes to the things that are most important. And so for me, I think it belies a lack of moral priority. And it's unfortunate. I think that, but I also think a lot of these folks, especially those, I think perhaps on the Democratic side, perhaps they don't even see it. I don't know. I don't know if that's a generous interpretation or not, but I legitimately think that they start kind of buying into conservative talking points. They get dragged into their court all the time. And I think it is because there's this really myopic and also just misunderstanding of politics as this flat, two-dimensional left-right thing. And so they always feel like, okay, the right says this thing, we have to respond to it. Mm-hmm. And that's why they're winning. That's why they've won for the last 10 years, because they've dragged us onto their court. And we refuse to have our own strong message to force them to play defense on.
Yeah. So I want to talk about what it means to have that strong message, because this is another thing people asked about, and it was around democratic socialism and about setting big goals versus when to compromise. I think there's a fair number of people like me who believe in Medicare for all, universal pre-K, debt-free college, higher minimum wage, progressive tax code, but I'm not a socialist. I believe in those things because I believe in a regulated free market and a social safety net. What's the difference between you and me?
I think the thing is that it's such a big tent term, because I could easily say that you're not a capitalist because you believe those things. I could easily say that capitalists believe in complete laissez-faire, invisible salad fingers, economy, and that because you don't believe that corporations should dictate every single aspect of your life, that you are not a capitalist. So I think it's like a similar thing in terms of this conversation about socialism, that unless you are a communist, you're not a socialist.
Right.
And I think it's one of these things where if you believe in the limitations of just pure free market, free market is, if you believed in pure free market, then you wouldn't believe in the ACA. You wouldn't believe in Medicare for all. You wouldn't believe in tuition-free public college. But in order for us to build wealth as a society, we have to understand that there are multiple players and multiple sectors in our economy that can build wealth. Corporations and businesses build wealth, but also when we, for example, decided to take the affirmative and bold step into building an interstate highway system, into electrifying this country, into providing tuition-free public K through 12 education for all. Those are not capitalist things. But we have to realize that there is more than one way to build wealth. And so, democratic socialism and the idea of democratic socialism is a really big tent. So there are people that perhaps believe all the same things you do, and the difference is that they would call themselves a democratic socialist, and other people wouldn't. And I think that that's fine. I think that we draw a lot of artificial lines in the sand. Plenty of socialists would say, I'm not a socialist. But it's I don't even think that that's what's up for debate right now.
Right.
And I just think that we make a lot of these conversations about isms, but at the end of the day, a lot of these isms are ultimately academic definitions, and the world is so much bigger and messier than that.
Right, but I guess I think that's right. I'm of two minds of it, in part because, I see the rise of democratic socialist sort of groups and activists as a good thing. It's a response to Trump. It's a response to feeling left behind by the Democratic Party. It's very clear that you have pulled the party to the left in ways that I think are positive. But at the same time, my worry is, well, if you have to be a democratic socialist to advocate for these things, does that mean that you're implicitly saying that they don't have a home in the Democratic Party?
Oh, I don't think – I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't think that you have to call yourself a democratic socialist to believe in these things. But I'm also not a hardliner. Some people are a hardliner. I'm not a hardliner kind of person. I'm very pragmatic. So I meet everybody where they're at, even if you're like the most Republican, even if you call yourself a Republican. There are people who call themselves Republican that I would say believe socialist things. For example, if you're in a union, that is a form of democratic socialism, is building worker power so that a corporation doesn't dictate and kind of undermine your right, your economic rights to basic human things that I think are part of basic human dignity, healthcare, a living wage. Union organizing is like a very basic unit of democratic socialism. It's a form of putting democracy into the workplace, building collective power, so that workers can have a say in what happens to them. But I think that I'm not a hardliner. You could say I'm a union worker. You may not call yourself a democratic socialist, and that's totally fine. Yeah,
I mean, it's funny because I found it very frustrating when people would, as their sort of final point, and Bernie's not even a Democrat, right? Why he should have to run it? I think that's dumb. But at the same time, I think after Trump won, to me, one of the greatest fears was A, that he would attack institutions, but also B, that in the wake of this incredible threat and a sense of loss, that there wouldn't be unity on the left. And to me, that unity is really important. So I guess, what is the value of being a democratic socialist versus being a Democrat for you? And I'm not asking you, I'm genuinely curious.
Well, I mean, I think that answer is super personal for every person. For me, the reason why I use this term is because, to be completely honest, I don't know what it means to be just a Democrat. You know, there are Democrats who are anti-choice. There are Democrats who don't believe in a $15, or not even, doesn't have to be $15. There are Democrats who don't believe that the minimum wage should be a living wage. There are Democrats who are willing to allow fossil fuel companies to do whatever they want. And so while I am happy to call myself a Democrat, I also want to be more than that. I want to communicate very clearly that I believe in the United States there is a minimum. We should aspire to establish institutions that are a minimum level, that provide a minimum level and guarantee a minimum level of human dignity in the United States. Joe Manchin's a Democrat. I'm not Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin and I are both Democrats, but Joe Manchin believes in coal. He believes in, he may be voting for Kavanaugh, who's going to totally dismantle Roe v. Wade and allow, Trump to get away with whatever he wants to get away with. And so for me, it's not that I'm going to, it's not that I'm here to burn the house down, but it's that I tend to think that the Democratic Party, I am a Democrat, but I also kind of think that it's a silver standard. And for me, it adds a gold standard of guaranteed, to aspiring to a guaranteed minimum level of economic and social dignity.
Right.
And so there are plenty of people in the party who agree, who I think would identify, but there are also plenty of people in the party who wouldn't agree.
Right, and just sort of the Joe Manchin argument. So we had Joe Manchin on, and we pushed him pretty hard to make sure that he would vote against Republican repeal efforts on healthcare, and he was a vote on that. And the fact, and I imagine if Joe Manchin were sitting here, he'd say, that's all well and good, but these are the positions I believe I have to take. And when you've needed me on votes on healthcare, I've been there. Wouldn't you rather have a conservative Democrat like me than a Republican who would be with you on none of these issues?
Well, I think we look at what happened to Joe Manchin this year. Joe Manchin faced a little to no talked about primary from a woman on the left, Paula Jean Swearingen. I know Paula Jean Swearingen very well. She's a coal miner's daughter. She ran on no money. Like, not only did she run on no corporate money, but she had nothing. In 2 years for a United States Senate race, she raised $179,000 total. And, you know, like when you're figuring stuff out in campaigns, like she really had probably less than 100K to actually run that race. She was out there knocking doors herself, no money. Joe Manchin dropped $2 million against her, and she still got 30% of the vote. So that, to me, tells me that in West Virginia, which, like, almost every county in West Virginia went for Bernie in 2016, who was further to the left, you know? That, to me, tells me that we need to start reframing our issues instead of left and right to top and down. And it's not about like, oh, you know, I have to weather my message to Republicans. There are people that really want to feel like there's an unapologetic working class champion for them. If Paula Jean Swearengin had $2 million, she got 30% of the vote on basically 79K. 30%, like that's unheard of. And she never held political office before. Or you look at on the other end, Bob Menendez in Florida. Like he had an opponent that like didn't even run a campaign, and she got like 40% of the vote or something like that.
New Jersey.
Or sorry, yeah, New Jersey. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I think that it's going to require a little busting of this idea that we have of politics that has been so calcified, that we've taken so much as fact, that I just don't think is necessarily true. And, you know, I even get letters from Republicans all the time who support me because I don't take corporate money.
So you think that, like, I just want to drill that. So it's this idea that, like, that politicians like Joe Manchin, they look at their electorate and they say, I can be populist or I can be pro-worker on certain economic issues, but I got to move to the right on Kavanaugh, on some on nominees or whatever, to demonstrate that I'm moderate enough to win in West Virginia. And your view is that there's actually a more left, progressive, working class agenda that can work.
The whole country is further left than Congress. The whole country. And this is in poll after poll after poll. 80% of Americans believe in responsible gun legislation. 60% of Americans believe in a single-payer healthcare system. The overwhelming majority of Americans believe in a living wage. Like the electorate is way further left than Congress. And, you know, we have low voter turnout, and I'm just amazed sometimes when I speak to either incumbents or when I speak to people in the party, and they act as though they don't exist. Like they act as though it's harder to get someone who doesn't vote to vote than to get a Republican to vote for a Democrat. Like, good luck with that one. Good luck with that one.
Well, if it worked, we'd have President Hillary Clinton.
And the thing that is like also sometimes frustrating to me is that this isn't just an idea. I don't have an opinion. This is backed by data. This is backed by 10 years of data. We have lost state legislators. We have lost gubernatorial seats. We have lost the House. We have lost the Senate. We have lost the presidency. And the idea that like, oh, you know, we got to keep trudging on. You know, I won this one race, and you would have thought that we took over half of the Democratic Party. They're like, the party has moved way too far to the left. It's one seat out of almost 200. And they're doubling down on this strategy. But poll after poll after poll shows that the electorate is way further to the left. And then when you just look at the Democratic Party, the numbers are even higher. 60% of Americans believe in single-payer health care. 74% of Democrats in this country believe in single-payer health care. So campaign on it.
So what do you think drives that fear for people like Joe Lieberman, or even, you know, senators who have been critical of you? Mm-hmm. Do you think that they are just, do you think it's cynical? Do you think they're just naively wrong about what works? I mean, there's clearly a group, there are people who look at what you're advocating and they say, I know that we've lost a lot, but we shouldn't go down this path. This is a recipe for failure. What do you think makes them think that?
So what I honestly think that it is that we have not had a party that has been investing in its own future. So we have people who are constantly fundraising for their own reelection. The average age of a House Democrat right now is 65 years old. We are at the oldest point in American history. And not only are people just feverishly working on their own reelection for their second or sometimes third decade, but there's no investment in future leadership. Like we're putting all of this money into state parties, and those state parties aren't working on aggressively investing in young people running in state assembly seats, state house seats, so that they can later go on to Congress. That is not happening. It's certainly happening on the right, but it hasn't been happening on the left. And so for me, I think what's happening is that, a lot of these folks were in their political heyday in third way 90s politics. And they were campaigning, and they were really kind of connected most to an electorate when they were fighting for these seats, when they got these seats, when they were campaigning most, when we had more of an American middle class. And so I think that politically, this like upper middle class is probably more moderate. But that upper middle class doesn't exist anymore in America. And thanks to the continued deregulation of Wall Street, thanks to the continued gutting of working and middle class people, we need stronger champions. But I don't think that they see exactly how rising income inequality has resulted in a very stark political reality, and it has changed our political landscape. But their heyday was in the 90s when kids had like Furbies and like parents, you had like soccer moms with like 2 vans and stuff like
Furbies and 2 vans.
Yeah.
That's a dream.
That's not America anymore.
So one thing that's happened too is I think a lot of people that are considering running for president have seen the way in which your campaign, others have animated the base of the Democratic Party. Kirsten Gillibrand recently, she's one of many of the people that may run who are for single payer or Medicare for all of some form. She also just proposed a postal banking system so that people that are right now sort of subject to payday lenders who can't get the main banking system. Yeah. What do you think about postal banking?
I'm a huge fan of postal banking. I live in a neighborhood that would be enormously impacted by postal banking. I live across the street from a check cashing place. I walk 5 minutes to my subway stop. There's a payday lender. There's a pawn shop. And, postal banking and I haven't read her bill specifically, but I do know that postal banking is huge, and it would be hugely important to working class communities because there is an entire cottage industry based on capturing the income of the already working poor. You take someone who is kind of unbanked in the traditional ways, and there are some studies that say as much as 10% of their income goes to these processing fees of your check cashing place, your payday lender, and that is like after the fact that they aren't being they aren't even being paid enough to live to begin with. And so I think that postal banking is extremely important. I think it would be huge. I think it would be a game changer for communities like mine, for working class communities across the country. And there's a lot of really exciting policy ideas, I think, out on the horizon. I think postal banking, public banking is huge. Things that we've talked about, a federal jobs guarantee. Folks are exploring, like Michael Tubbs, who's the mayor of Stockton. He's exploring doing a pilot program of universal basic income in some communities. Yeah, and so I think that's also what people want right now. They want new ideas, not reformed versions of old ideas. And I think that they provide really promising new solutions because I think there are a lot of sectors that are they have reached their overly predatory logical ends. And I think they show the necessity and the benefit of having a public option.
So you're going to go back and campaign for your seat. Hopefully you win that seat. You get to Congress. What are you most excited about when you're going to take office? Yeah. What are you hoping to do first?
Well, for me, one of the reasons why I won my race and then immediately started going to places like Kansas and Michigan and out here in California and St. Louis is because, A, we have another whole round of primaries coming up on August 7th and August 11th. But B, I am most excited about working with a progressive freshman class. Because I know that that's the only way we can get things done. And I also know that there are really exciting people on the horizon. Whether they win or not, I think that they really represent a vision for a positive future. I think folks like Ilhan Omar out in Minnesota, she's so inspiring, so amazing. She doesn't take, and none of these people take corporate money, and they all have a shot. I was just in Michigan with Abdul El-Sayed, but there's also 2 congressional candidates. There's Rashida Tlaib, Fayrouz Saad. And so once we get in there, I think, what I think I'd really look forward to, I think that strategically we've built enough power around certain bills that we can really push forward. Like Medicare for All now has over 100 co-sponsors on it. Which I think is just incredibly exciting, and it's a testament to the grassroots strength of the progressive movement right now. And I really also look forward to presenting new bills. Like John Conyers put Medicare for All on the floor of Congress, like in the early 2000s, over almost 20 years ago. And this bill has been languishing on the floor of Congress waiting for its movement. And now its movement has come. And so I think that, some of the work that I look forward to is maybe putting down some of those bills that perhaps won't have that immediate passage and support, but they need to be there. They need to be there so that we can build movements around them. But I think in terms of passage, I think Medicare for All is extremely, extremely exciting. Working on things like comprehensive immigration reform, figuring out what those ideas are, criminal justice, ending the war on drugs, legalizing marijuana. I think it's stuff that are these really big, bold ideas, but also have an overwhelming amount of support in the American electorate. I'm really excited about those kinds of things.
And are you worried that Joe Lieberman is going to be able to stop you?
I just think it's so funny. The guy who campaigned for John McCain over Obama and single-handedly killed the public option in the United States is trying to tell us what the future of the Democratic Party is. I think it's all right. Whatever.
I feel like we got to end on something other than whatever. But maybe not. You know what? Whatever to Joe Lieberman. Thank you, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for joining us on Pod Save America. It is great to finally meet you.
Yeah, no, likewise.
And good luck in your race.
Thank you. Thank you so, so much. I had such a great time.
Bye.
Bye.